There's a section of the Dred Scott decision, probably Pastor Hoy, you're familiar with this, but the court lays out arguments against granting African Americans personhood, and they say, well, if we did this, then African Americans would have the right to bear arms. Imagine that. If we did this, then African Americans would have these rights and those rights, and sort of trying to scare people. It's kind of the same thing with personhood amendments. We get attacked by the Planned Parenthood lobby saying, if you do this, then you're going to have to, give Social Security cards to, fetuses and count them in the census and all these ridiculous things. The basic thing is if we pass a personhood amendment. When? Yeah, when? Well, actually, in 56 days when we pass a personhood amendment in Colorado. 51%, hopefully more, but we'd be happy with 50% plus one vote of the people are going to require, through their vote, that our laws respect human beings equally. We're going to have to reconcile our current interpretation of the law, which allows for the violation of human life in all sorts of circumstances, from the laboratory to the abortion clinic to family courts. All of those things are going to have to be reformed. But, why is that an argument against doing this? That's the argument for doing this. The fact that abortion has seeped into so many aspects of our life, mostly through the courts, but through education, through everything, really, even into our churches. We have mainline Christian denominations that are pro-abortion in their books.
Pay for abortion.
Yeah. That's a reason for doing this. That's not a reason against doing this. So I say bring it on. 56 days, let's start working on how to implement and how to respect life.
So we're going to wrap this up and go Colorado and get that one passed now, right? Sorry. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say I agree with that, in that it's our job to bring common sense back to the table, and that's what Personhood does. So we are respecting and protecting and demanding that our states enforce this in Colorado, that every human being is a person. And it's really up to the legislature and law enforcement to enforce that. And we can demand that of them as citizens as well. But first we have to do this. I mean, we can never have any of these crimes prosecuted unless they're considered crimes. So yes, this all has to be worked out, but first we have to do personhood, bring common sense back to the table.
And the great thing about doing this through an initiative process is that, the acceptance of it comes from the ground up. Mm-hmm. And so the implementation is going to be a lot easier. If we were able to magically get 9 judges in the Supreme Court to say, personhood's the way to go, we'd have, pandemonium. Through an initiative process, we have the people pressuring these politicians. It's an organic thing. They pressure the politicians. They know that if they go against the will of the people, they'll be out of office. You'll be surprised how quickly a politician will become pro-personhood. In Colorado, just a quick example, we haven't passed it yet, but in 51 days when we pass it, we'll see that most of these Republican politicians, in only 2 years, we've done the Personhood Amendment twice, in 2008 and now in 2010. In 2008, we didn't have a single national office seeker that supported the amendment. Not one. All of them said, "Well, I'm pro-life. I'm Republican. Personhood's in our platform," but it goes too far, which coincidentally is the motto for Planned Parenthood. But they, from that time to today, every single GOP candidate, every single person who calls himself Republican, both at the local and state, national offices that they're seeking, uses personhood as their way to say that I'm pro-life. So they're actually being honest now. When they say, well, I'm pro-life because I support personhood, that definition of pro-life is actually true, because before they would say, well, I'm pro-life, but with the exception of rape, and so Rebecca suddenly, disappears, and all of the Rebeccas of this world disappear. So now they're actually having to say, I'm pro-life, and we have our next senator, probably Senator Buck in Colorado, who is actually out there defending his position that children conceived in rape have this dignity, and should be respected, and we shouldn't allow abortion even in those cases. And so that's what Personhood has done. That's what reaching out to individuals has done. That's the power of grassroots. These politicians suddenly become advocates.
But with Personhood in place in Colorado, then the abortion centers won't be able to operate legally. So they will shut down. I mean, Planned Parenthood relies so heavily on the money that they make from abortions, and they'll make a big stink about it. They won't be able to operate anymore, so there won't be places for people to go. And then they'll want to, I mean, this is just conjecture, but I can imagine that in the interest of protecting women, mothers, and their children, since there are not these centers to go to anymore, they'll be doing a lot of criminal prosecution of these people, whoever they are, that are still killing children, because it's dangerous. I mean, it's dangerous now, but they'll be prosecuting. I mean, I would imagine. I don't know what you would have to add to that.
So I'm going to pull it back here a little bit. And I have a question that comes up to us a lot, and I think might be, as different folks here in different states are working on this, that might be brought up to you as a reason not to do this. But the question is, the passage of a state personhood amendment could trigger an appellate process which would strengthen Roe v. Wade, making pro-life efforts more difficult in the future. And another way we've heard this is that you're just going to cement Roe versus Wade or create an abortion super right if you do this. So speak to that.
How is it not already a super right? I mean, how can you, what they say usually is you're going to further entrench the right to abortion. It is entrenched. It's absolute. I mean, I don't consider it a right per se, how they're saying it, but you have access all 9 months of pregnancy everywhere. I mean, how could it get any worse than that?
I was in D.C. at the time of the confirmation of Justice Roberts, and there was a big debate. Some of you may remember it, and Arlen Specter, who used to be a Republican and is now a Democrat, he was sort of the voice for the abortion lobby, and he was talking about the super precedent. He wanted to get Justice Roberts to say abortion is a super precedent. And he got up and he showed this big board, and he said, you know how many times Roe versus Wade has been affirmed? And I don't know. I'm like, oh, how many times? It was like 200 times. So for someone to say that because you pass a personhood amendment and the court strikes it down, that's it, we'll just sink even deeper. It's been affirmed 200 times. What about from 207 times to 208 times? Do you really think that's going to change anything? No, it's really a nonsensical argument, I think. We've gone about as low as we can get. And proof of that is that we have, we're going to start getting taxpayer-funded abortions. I think there is one further step, and that's, we could become China, and then, we'd have coerced abortion. I think that's about the only step back we can take. And I seriously doubt the court's going to start forcing people to have abortions because of personhood.
Now, you mentioned the rape issue, so I'd just like to address that real quick. I love the fact that with personhood, there are no exceptions. Amen. It's just totally not an issue. It's not like you're going to say, oh, well, this is a person, but this child conceived in rape is not a person. That would be ludicrous.
Dred Scott, Roe versus Wade, in thinking of those two decisions side by side, would passing a personhood amendment, the amendment just sit on the books until we overturn Roe versus Wade? Or do we need to overturn Roe versus Wade at all?
It would have, first of all, like I said in Michigan, I told Ed Rivet this when he called and tried to talk me out of supporting the personhood amendment petition drive 4 years ago. Everybody who was listed on the website supporting it got a call from either Ed Rivet or Barb Listing from Right to Life in Michigan. And he said to me, besides, first of all, he said, who are these people? Do you really want to have another pro-life organization collecting statewide signatures, names, and addresses of pro-life people across our state? And I heard rumors they might want to start a political action committee. Do we really want that? Who are these people? So there's like a huge competition issue. But then the other thing that he said is that, well, besides, it won't even have any immediate effect. And I said, well, it'll have an immediate impact on frozen embryos. And he said, oh, we were just going to start looking at that issue. Well, a little late. When I handled the frozen embryo case in Michigan, we had a court of appeals ruling that said my client had disappeared on appeal, and there was a bench warrant for her arrest because she disappeared with their child because the father was about to get unsupervised visitation, and that was just a bad scenario. And so they said it was inappropriate to rule. And they said, however, and they put in bold and underlined, we urge the legislature to act in this important issue. And I thought, this is golden. Wow, for a lobbyist, they're going to love this. I mean, to have a court of appeals say something like this. And so I went to Ed Rivet, and he basically said, well, our legislative agenda is set for the next 3 years. I'm like, you're kidding me. And so they could have done something back then when the time was right, when we had a pro-life governor and we had a pro-life legislature. And so he said, we're going to start looking at this issue. And then 2 years later, this is 2 years ago, we had an amendment to the Michigan Constitution to make embryonic stem cell research legal. And with the Obama tsunami and everything, conservatives stayed home and liberals came out, and this passed. And their best argument was that the law in Michigan was nonsensical because it said you couldn't destroy embryos for research purposes, but you could destroy them for no purpose. And that was their best argument. It was a good argument. And they said, what a waste. Let's just use them. And we could have made a difference right then with Personhood. We could have had an immediate impact on frozen embryos. There are a lot of states that don't have what Michigan unfortunately has right now, and you could close the door on this embryonic stem cell research in your state right now, immediately, by getting this passed.
Yeah. And when the media goes out there and interviews some of the outright advocates of abortion, not the pro-lifers who disagree with us, but people who are doing killing embryos through research, people who are killing embryos for money, or babies in the womb like Planned Parenthood or the ACLU that's defending them, they will open up and admit what the consequences of this is. They say, sometimes they lie, sometimes they use outright scare tactics, like I think an example on there in your questions is criminalizing miscarriages, which is ridiculous. But they will say, well, this is going to prevent us from performing, this life-saving stem cell research, which has never saved a single life yet. But they say, this is going to limit how IVF is done. So they actually lay out all of the consequences of Personhood Amendment, and they're not lying. That's really, we want IVF to be reformed so that you don't create 20 human beings to implant one, or that you don't implant 8 human beings and then abort the 7 that you don't want. We need ethics in medicine. We need ethics in stem cell research, where there is actual research that can be done that's ethical and that doesn't destroy life. And so we need those things. And they're admitting that all of these are consequences of a Personhood Amendment. So that's, if there are any sort of pro-lifers in the audience here who are in the camp of people who say, well, this isn't the right strategy, it's really not going to do anything, it's going to sit on the books, I'd say, look at how the opposition is reacting to us. They sue us to even prevent us from getting on the ballot. Why is that? They're not making money off of those lawsuits. Scientists will pipe up and say how dangerous this is because it might inject some ethics into their profession.